Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee this evening. I'd like to welcome as well Victoria Gent, the new Director of Children's Services. Good evening. And just a reminder, please everybody, to keep yourselves on mute unless you're speaking. Wonderful, thank you. So we'll make a start on the agenda. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Stansfield.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a personal interest in agenda item 6 as I volunteer work for Street Life for the homeless.
Thank you. And I also have a personal interest in agenda item 6 as I'm employed by Street Life and we work with homeless young people. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much. So the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January. Do we believe that they're a true and correct record? If you could show your hands. Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Okay, and item 3, public speaking. We don't have any public speakers this evening. So we will move on to agenda item 4. And sorry, I'm just flicking between I've got a new laptop to work with tonight, so I might be technically a little bit slow. Apologies for that. Just bear with me a second. Excellent. Yeah, so I've got it now in front of me. Agenda item 4. We've all had sight of that. Jeanette, do you want to talk us through it?
Hi, thank you, Chair. The signal is bad and there's a disruption in signal, I think. So apologies if you can't hear me. But thank you. I would just open it up to comments and questions, if that's okay. And we have got Sarah McCart, an officer. She's the head of service with responsibility for the youth offending team, here tonight to respond to comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. And just to let you know, I could hear you quite clearly then. That was good. So,
thank you.
Okay, committee members, do we have any questions? Thank you, Councillor Critchley.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's on page 12, 6.5, and it says about assurances being given to about the secure unit. Can I just ask what assurances are being given by the Youth Custody Service, and what kind of interventions are being provided, and who are providing the interventions? And then just to finish off that, and do the youth offending team feel reassured that the interventions that are being adapted are enough to reassure them that things are moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchley. What I would say to Scrutiny is that the vast majority of our young people under 18 who commit offences are dealt with in a way that doesn't deprive them of their liberties, so aren't in custodial establishments. And the number of children that are in custody has started to reduce over time to be very small numbers. However, we are obviously very concerned whenever a child is deprived of their liberty and in custody. So as you'll see from the report, since our inspection back in 2018, we've introduced some custody panels that's led by the chair of that themed improvement plan, and that's really to scrutinise those decisions. So could a child have been kept away from custody in the first place? And if sadly they have to go to custody, what measures are in place to keep them safe? What do their education measures look like, their wellbeing measures, and those important transitions in their childhood? So within custody panel, all of that is scrutinised, and that is built back in live, obviously, in anything that involves young people, but also after the fact in terms of workforce development and building into our improvement plan around custody. But I would say one of the biggest concerns most recently, and we've only got 2 children in custody currently, is around COVID and within custodial establishments, young people being kept in their rooms for prolonged periods of time. And we've challenged that as an authority to ensure that custodies provide different arrangements around education during periods of isolation and different ways to communicate with their family and us where there have been periods of lockdown due to COVID outbreaks.
Thank you, Sarah. Does that answer your question, Councillor Critchley?
It does, yes, but could we get some regular sort of updates then on that, of how things are progressing?
Yes, definitely.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you.
Could I just add another comment? I think the significant improvement journey that the youth offending team has been on, in conjunction with the wider partnership, has meant that, you know, now we're in a much stronger place. There are far fewer children in custody than in previous years in Blackpool, and so that is something of an achievement as agencies are working together in a much more proactive way to support young people. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jeanette. We can see on the graph on 6.8 that there is a significant drop, isn't there, on there? So yeah, congratulations for the progress that's been made there. Thank you. I'd just like to ask, please, I'd just like a little bit more information on the reduction of unnecessary court appearances for under 18s is great. But could you give us a little bit more information on the range of community interventions? What do these include and how successful are they?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Chair. There is now a panel, so this is unique to Blackpool, where it's a multi-agency panel looking at a range of options for young people, very much tailored, so there's nothing sort of off the shelf. It depends on that young person and their family. So for some young people, it might be, you know, some whole family support to wrap around them to divert them away from their offending behaviour. For some, it could be, you know, a caution with conditions around a letter of apology. For some young people, it could be some active community service with restorative justice element to it. And so really it's very much tailored to the young person's needs and the circumstances that have led them to the attention of the Youth Justice Service in the first place.
Thank you. I have a further question as well. On 11.1, you outline that there's a disproportionate number of our children and that work is underway to address this. Could you just give us a little bit more information about what kind of work?
Yeah, of course. So a real practical example from this week is we have an agreement between the heads of service across my service and Supporting Our Children, whereby if any of our children come to the attention of, you know, there's a potential likelihood that they may be in custody, that we immediately meet to start to plan their resettlement and their exit plan from the start. So how can we ensure that if they, you know, can they be diverted away from custody? Certainly. But if that is going to be the outcome, can we start to plan for positive outcomes while they're in custody and on their release? So some real practical things about joining up across services to have those conversations. And then so much broader work across the authority in terms of our youth justice team, meeting with care homes to talk about how we can reduce the criminalisation of young people in terms of not necessarily looking to call the police if there are sort of antisocial behaviours, but looking at how we can support that as a council before we get to that stage, if ever we need to get to that stage.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? Sorry, Jeanette.
Could I add something to that? I think absolutely there's a disproportionate amount of our children that are looked after that are represented within the youth justice cohort. That is something that's reflected nationally. It's absolutely not good enough, and we are much more aspirational for our children. And there is ongoing work thinking about more proactive care planning when children enter into care, and all the work around our social work improvement plan around ensuring that we improve the quality of practice to those children that have been separated from their birth families, and a much wider consideration of the holistic needs of our children to hopefully divert them away from criminal activity. But Sarah makes a really good point around we must influence wider partners, including the police, around and their duties around support, thinking about a different way to support our looked after children and not criminalising them. Thank you.
Thank you. So the information in 11.1, it says here it's data from the exec board in September 2020. So is that, is it coming, are we getting better at that, or is the statistics, is it flat, or, are we improving?
Yes, it is. It's being monitored. It is quite low at the moment, but the delay in data isn't necessarily our own data, because we know that day on day. Currently, there are 18 young people known to the Youth Justice team who also are children. It's the comparator data that there's a bit of a time lag because it's national. So yeah, it's something we scrutinise and monitor closely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jeanette. Any more questions on this item? Councillor Clapham?
It was a simple one. I reflect back to the last meeting, and we were no longer going to be using the phrase looked after children or children looked after, and yet we've only been going, 11 minutes, and this is what we keep referring to. And the children that are in our care don't like that label. So are we going to revert to the phrase that the children in our care should be used? That was all.
Absolutely. Thank you,
certainly.
Clapham.
Thank you for that, Councillor Clapham. Okay, then we shall, if there are no more questions on this item, we can move on to agenda item 5, the Children's Social Care Improvement Plan for Care Leavers. And again, I think this is over to you, Jeanette, to introduce.
Thank you, Councillor Hugo. Once again, I will open it up for comments and questions and invite Sarah to respond to those as the lead officer. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we got any questions, committee members? Councillor Critchley, and then I'll take Councillor Wing.
Thanks, Chair. Mine's just about the unsuitable living accommodation. It says 5% of care leavers are living in accommodation deemed unsuitable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sort of triggers a few things for me as well. But what do we mean by unsuitable? And how long do they have to be in these unsuitable accommodations before we try and move them somewhere else? And why do we put them in there in the first place if they're unsuitable? Thanks, Sarah.
Of course. In Blackpool, the majority of our young people who are classed as unsuitable are actually in custody. So obviously we deem that not suitable. There are a small, not even a handful, a few children that we look at every single day where they are choosing to stay with their friends and don't have accommodation of their own. So although that might be their life choice currently, we're constantly supporting them with different pathways through housing and to live independently. But we deem that as currently unsuitable because they're not necessarily in the best position to transition into adulthood. What I would say is we've always done very well in terms of suitable accommodation because we've got some robust pathways with our housing colleagues for our young people and starting that transition early and looking at contingency planning. Obviously, it could always be better and we strive for that. But what I would say is nationally, it's about 86%. So we are higher than national average. And obviously, we wouldn't like any of our children in custody and would like to be at 100% for our children.
Thanks, Sarah. But instead of unsuitable, then could you not put sort of it's their life choice or their choice at this? Do you know what I mean? Could you not find a different word? Because when I read that unsuitable, I sort of thinking, gosh, we're putting them in flats that are not. Do you know what I'm saying? Course, so maybe we can find a different way to sort of just put in, because that makes sense when you say it then, that young people do have choices where they want to be, don't they? And sometimes they're not always the best choices. So thank you for that.
Just before I move on to Councillor Wing, could I just ask a supplementary question on this, really, out of curiosity? Where do children and young people show up who are not from our area? So they're trying to word it in Councillor Clapham's terms. They're not our children, they're somebody else's children. So they're from, they're looked after children from another authority. Where would they show up in the statistics?
So they wouldn't be on our statistics in terms of our young people with care experience. This is our children, but it also includes our children that live all over, the country. So we've got a couple of young people in Scotland, one in Ireland. So our data reflects the children of Blackpool.
Yeah. So when children come from out of the area, how are they captured? The statistics of children. Sorry.
Sorry. I was going to answer your question. And they would be captured in their responsible local authority at the point that they left care. So they would be a care leaver from the authority that they left the care of. So they would be reported in their figures. So let's say a child lives in Blackpool in unsuitable accommodation who's a care leaver but was in care to Manchester, they would be in Manchester's figures.
So we don't keep an account of how many children come to Blackpool from other areas?
Councillor Hugo, if I could respond to that. So there's two separate issues here. One is this, that the duty lies with the responsible authority. So we could have a young person living in Blackpool whose responsible authority is Manchester, as Robert has described. And Manchester's responsibilities would be to notify Blackpool of that care leaver residing in Blackpool, thinking about the possibility or the likelihood that young person will require additional support services, and those support services within Blackpool will be coordinated by the responsible authority.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to harp on about that. I was just thinking, are we measuring how much of an issue it is and how much of an impact it has on our service, having to deal with these young people when they come to our town? That's where I was going with that thought. So thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Wing, have you still?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Councillor Critchley actually asked my question, so okay. I'm fine with the answer on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell? You've muted yourself, Councillor Mitchell. Thank you.
Okay. I've got a question of my own, but I actually like to follow up the Chairman's question there. I understand that if care leavers leave another authority and come to Blackpool, the responsibility for coordinating the care is of that local authority that they've moved from. But do we do anything with these youngsters, and do we visit them on behalf of the other authority? I mean, I just wonder if we could be told that, please.
So we don't, because we visit our young people wherever they are. However, that's from our leaving care service. We would make an exception if contacted. Of course, we'd always safeguard young people. But what I would say is the other arm of our adolescent service, which is around substance misuse and sexual health, the referrals to that service or to any young person that lives in Blackpool all the way up to 25. And we certainly do have care leavers from other areas who are open to that service. And we link in with a personal advisor in the authority that they're from to be part of their pathway plan to support that young person around their needs around if it's sexual health or substance misuse.
Thanks. It's handy to know that, because I know it's quite common for care leavers to leave southern authorities and come to Blackpool. And a social worker might visit them once every few months or half an hour or so, but that's not necessarily a wraparound service. If I may, Chair, I'll move on to my own question. I'm conscious of the statistic of those not in education, employment and training. I think it's about 50% in Blackpool, which is very high. What are our plans to deal with that, to improve the situation?
Yeah, definitely. So we are plugging away at this, and it remains our main priority for this service. We have made some good inroads even during the pandemic, although that has stalled some of our work placement activity. Our personal advisors, so each young person's got a personal advisor, are driving and supporting our young people emotionally in terms of preparing for education, training, employment. It might be adapting to the digital world that we're in now and providing them with devices and some other things that will support them practically. We've got a good financial package for our care leavers in terms of those that are interested in higher education and further education. We've got some really good access rates. So 22 of our children are actually at university at the moment, and 2 of those doing their masters. As a local authority, we ring fence vacancies and prioritise our own young people for those vacancies, and some work's underway to look at the entry requirements for those currently. We're also highly focusing on our care leavers for the Kickstarter vacancies that have been created due to the pandemic. We've had some success just this week with one of our young people securing one of those posts within waste services. We have co-opted and linked in with all the different support providers, such as opportunity areas and our own HR, to gain 3 full-time employment advisors that are co-located with the adolescent service, helping us with this and supporting our young people who might not know what pathway they want to go down and might need that additional coaching and support. Working closely with our arm's length companies, so Blackpool Coastal Housing, etc., to make sure that we can, when restrictions lift, work placement opportunities within our own town, so within our own family firm, are available to our young people. We have, during the pandemic, had 3 of our young people gain some civil service posts, which are like 6-month internships. And we've also had another 3 young people gain in very similar positions with the DWP. Just this morning, I had a meeting with the nursing director for the Northwest around the NHS about how we can prioritise our young people for those kinds of roles at all levels. We're working across in a really strategic way around the education strategy, and Paul, who's also on the call, we're working together on a NEAT strategy, so really focusing on our young people, our most vulnerable young people, and how we can get those pathways right really early so that we're not looking at this sort of 18 plus and starting very early. In the pipeline, we're working with Head Start to develop a youth advisory board to help us drive that NEAT strategy. And Virtual Schools are also appointing a careers and opportunities coach. And just this week, we are making steps to open our core, which is, as you know, our young person's building, to have some face-to-face employment education training sessions, because with the best will in the world, it is hard virtually for some of our young people, and they need that one-to-one face-to-face support. So 50% is not good enough, and we are on with it, and it is our main priority.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Stansfield?
Thank you, Chair. It's on the Ofsted report, and it's got a section in it that refers to our quality of social work practice. And it does say that we're still very mixed in our practice. There is evidence of good and among other. How stable is our social care team now, and have we built something up that we are now going to be able to work with, or is it still quite volatile into what we've got as far as newly qualified social workers are concerned? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll come in and respond to your question, which is a really good question. So as other authorities, one of our key challenges and priorities is around recruitment. We are in a much more positive place in terms of staffing sufficiency than we have previously been through our improvement journey since the inadequate inspection. But that said, we've got some uncovered posts, and we continue to think about creative approaches to recruitment and creative approaches to staff retention. We are constantly seeking feedback from our staff around their support whilst they are with us, which will inform our offer going forward. And HR support us with that, I have drop-in sessions. Our PSW supports with that, and we've got a Shadow Getting to Good board that there's representatives from all of our services that come together and think about those issues. We have managed to reduce our agency capacity down to 15%. So the vast majority of our workforce are substantive post holders, which is a great improvement on where we were 12 months ago. We have no managed social work teams within the service. But like others, one of our key challenges is burnout in child protection particularly. And we are really reliant on ASYEs and those that are entering the profession for the first time. So we're in a position where around 38% of all of our social work practitioners are in their first year in practice. And we recognise the vulnerabilities around that. So we have our practice development team with ASYE coordinators who support those social workers who are in their first year in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Callow, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased that the staff retention is improving, but it does concern me that, you know, how high it is. When staff leave and they have obviously an interview with HR, do they go on to another authority, or do the majority of them look for another career? And do other local authorities have a similar problem with staff retention? Thank you.
So we very, very closely monitor those that exit our teams. We're really interested in the reasons why and thinking about are there any other options? So for instance, when there's been members of staff that feel a bit burnt out by frontline safeguarding, they've moved to other teams across children's services such as adoption or fostering, or becoming IRO. So we encourage retention by thinking about other options for those practitioners. What we can see, it's a mixed picture, and as I say, we monitor it very carefully. And those that actually leave Blackpool often leave to become agency social workers. That has been the recent trend of late, where despite our best endeavours, those members of staff have left to join social work agencies, and they have essentially capitalised on the market at this moment in time that has been exacerbated by COVID. So the challenges that we've had with regard to recruitment, there's been an added layer because of COVID. There's been a real slowdown nationally in social work recruitment. Individuals have maybe stayed in post. Other authorities that have got greater challenges around social work capacity are using agencies much more than ourselves, and therefore there's a real strong market need for agency social workers. And so many of the social workers that have left recently, and it has reduced, have gone on to take up agency roles.
Thank you, Jeanette. Councillor Williams, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. I think just to add to what Jeanette said, and I think Jeanette is underselling the work that she's done, you know, in relation to this, really, because we're trying a lot. It isn't just about retaining. We've got to get good social workers in the first place, and there's a national shortage. It's a national problem and has been for a while. So, you know, there's been a lot of work that has been done around with the university to ensure that we get the pick of the crop, but the best ASYEs, and work with them and develop those relationships, and they understand how work is going, you know, how they'll be expected to work and what is on offer at Blackpool. And I think, you know, particularly, you know, Jeanette and obviously Diane, I know Vicky's on the call, I'm sure she will continue this, you know, making sort of the work that is done at Blackpool, that it's you know, attractive. There is a general kind of, there is a recognition, I think, you know, in terms of particularly around Blackpool Families Rock and the work that has been done with that it is a good and supportive place to come, as well as all of the other things that have been done around financial measures, etc., to try and make it more attractive to come to Blackpool. So it's absolutely, an issue, and there has been no let up in focus really around this area, both getting the right staff, and keeping them.
Chair, if I could add to Councillor Williams' comments, I think what we have seen in terms of recent successes around attracting applicants is that we've seen applicants from a broader geographical footprint as we become more of an employer of choice. And there's been the deliberate recruitment strategies where we've had editorials in national social work magazines talking about our improvement journey, talking about our model of practice, which to some degree has generated some interest. And the other consideration that we've had, as well as engaging positively with the universities, we've grown our apprenticeship offer. So developing some of our skilled practitioners who are in other areas of children's services. That didn't sound too good. And inviting them to make applications to become social work apprentices, which we've tripled our capacity to support apprenticeships. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you everybody for your comments there, and we do appreciate all the hard work and effort. I can see Councillor Clapham wants to come in. Thank you.
Yes, mine was only a small comment following the motorbike that went through and destroyed part of what Jeanette was saying, which was a shame. At the bottom of page 21, the first bullet point talks about the consistency and quality of work for children subject to children protection plans and the need to reduce drift and delay. I would have thought that children's protection plans were paramount in their future. So I've heard all about the difficulties of good social workers, retention and so on, but there must be a need to put an awful lot of work into that bullet point, because Ofsted are watching it.
Absolutely. So this is a challenge for children's services and is a priority within our social work improvement plan. Very much improving the quality of practice that we deliver to those children that are in need of help and protection. It's also a partnership issue. So children that are subject to child protection plans is very much a multi-agency support plan in place. So there is a programme of auditing around the effectiveness of the component parts of that child protection plan. So for example, the core groups, which is the meeting where the professionals, a team around the family, come together to work up those plans, assess the effectiveness of those plans. But critical to it, this area of work, there are a number of drivers. We know that neglect is a particular issue in Blackpool, hence the launch of our neglect strategy. But thinking about how we can more proactively engage with our families to enable and effect change with our families is dependent on learning and development of our frontline practitioners. And again, we've got a programme of learning and development to increase their skills in order to engage with children and families in this way. I would say that for what is most important is impact and outcome, and asking ourselves the challenging questions: have we got the offer right for these families? And sometimes children will need to remain subject to child protection plans for longer periods of time, where it's safe to do so, to create the space for parents to think about addressing the issues that are impacting on their parenting skills. But also it sits very firmly in the centre of our priority, and that is, wherever possible, we will do our best to maintain the care of children within their families. But absolutely, it's something that is a worry to us. So thank you, Councillor Clapham.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Thank you. And I think, yes, the letter that you've circulated from Ofsted is a bit bittersweet, really. There is some positives, but also some negatives. And I just wondered, were there any surprises or shocks for you when you received the letter?
Well, we were always not surprised or shocked, disappointed around the negative tone of the letter, because some of the positive messages, and there are significant positive messages in there, are in terms of our improvement journey, are perhaps a little buried. But to answer your question, Councillor Hugo, there were no surprises there because of the work that we've done around our performance management, our QA framework. We understand ourselves well. And at the beginning of the process of the focus visits, one of the first things that happens is the team delivers a presentation to the inspectors. So we are essentially setting out our store. We identify our areas of strength and we identify our areas of weakness and areas for further development. And they were very much reflected back to us in our in the feedback sessions from inspectors and within the letter.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions for this item? Or comments? No? Okay. Just to emphasise as well that we do appreciate all the effort that you're putting in, and keep up the good work, and we'll continue to be making improvements. Thank you. So the next agenda item, moving on to agenda item 7, the Children's Safeguarding Assurance Partnership Annual Report. And we'll just find my page again. Sorry about this. Yeah, handing over to Stephen Ashley, please.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. I presume everyone has had a chance to see the report, so I'll happily answer any questions you might have about it. I thought it might be useful to give maybe an overview rather than go through the report sort of page by page. And I think I hope you'll think it's quite an interesting report. The bottom line here, of course, is that this report covers a period for the year ending the 30th of September. So just to cover this off, first of all, it's a rather strange time to have an annual report finishing. But the reason for that is that the new child safeguarding arrangements that replaced what you'll remember as the Local Safeguarding Children Board, the LSCB, came into effect in September 2019. And so it was agreed that we would do a report really at the end of that first year. It's taken quite a while to put together for one reason or another, but we've sort of got there now. And the intention will be that there will be an interim report done towards the end of the year. And it is likely that future reports will either run from the 1st of January or the 1st of April, depending what the Executive Board agree towards the end of the year. So it's a rather an odd time period, but that sort of explains the reason why. I suppose what I hope the report reflects to you, and as the independent scrutineer, I'm not the chair of that Executive Board, so the report comes to me for sort of validation to some degree, and you'll notice there is within it a section that I've written. The bottom line is that up until recently there were 3 priorities that the board had around domestic abuse, neglect and contextual safeguarding. So this report has focused on those 3 areas and highlights the work that's been undertaken by the partnership. And there really is some very positive work that's taken place over that period. And I think we need to reflect, as we all do, or a lot, the environment in which we're working. So not only was this a new safeguarding arrangement with the 3 local authorities, the 8 CCGs, the 1 police force brought together into one safeguarding partnership, which in itself is pretty unique nationally. In fact, nationally, where others have tried to do that, they've already failed and found that they couldn't work together. So I think we are seen very much as a success from that point of view. So that in itself was difficult, but of course, very shortly after the partnership actually started to work together, coronavirus hit, and so we've worked in a very unusual environment, I guess it would be fair to say, moving through the year. And I think that does have an effect in a number of ways. There is a short piece in the report about working under coronavirus, and we're currently undertaking a piece of work and have added a priority to the board around coronavirus, what we've learned from it, and what we're putting in place to deal with the possible aftermath as we go through this year, hopeful aftermath. So in terms of those three priority areas, we've seen a lot of positive progress. What we do see is in an issue like contextual safeguarding, clearly Blackpool had been doing a lot of work around this prior to the Safeguarding Partnership coming into existence. What the work that's been done this year has helped to do is to actually make sure that the support for all three areas is the same, and especially in areas like county lines, which don't recognise the local authority borders, there's a much more joined up approach through a contextual safeguarding board, which oversees the work of contextual safeguarding. We've also just employed an analyst that will provide a lot more focused work for the partnership around contextual safeguarding. In terms of domestic abuse, Councillor Williams is probably in a better position than me to speak on the new board that's been set up. You'll be aware that there is a new act that will be coming into force very shortly, and that makes a number of requirements, not least of which there needs to be a local domestic abuse board. And we now have that in place, and that is up and running. That should really help us focus. And I don't think anyone's under any illusions here about the amount of work that's required around domestic abuse. So again, I welcome that, and I think that's a really positive step forward. Just in terms, though, of what you might feel might have been happening over this period of coronavirus, all areas of Lancashire, but that includes Blackpool, have not seen huge increases in reported levels of domestic abuse. The increases are around the level of around 8%. So whilst there is an increase, it's not as disproportionate as it seems in some areas. So Birmingham, for instance, have seen rises of anything up to sort of 30%. But until things really start to unfold, I guess we won't know that true picture. In terms of neglect, this is an area of real concern. For me personally, I think this is the area where, as we move forward, we are likely and potentially likely to see more neglect cases. And I'm sure Jeanette will have a view on this, and Ricky Kemp will certainly have a view on this moving into the new role. So at the moment, we don't have this huge sort of amount of evidence to say that the neglect cases are getting worse. I think, though, professionals would feel that there are a lot of families who hadn't potentially been involved in terms of child protection previously that might have moved closer to the edge of that. And I think that's where I'm really grateful for the work that's been undertaken around Blackpool Families Rock. I think that is the most critical piece of work moving forward this year. That really has to work if we're to see a level of prevention around neglect cases. And as long as we continue to get the sort of partnership engagement that there has been, I'd be very confident that that will work. And as you already know, there is evidence that it is working. So I guess the overall picture is positive as far as it can be. I think there is a real concern from me about what the future holds, and that certainly includes what difference the education system will have made in terms of children being in and out of school, whether we continue to see a rise in home education, whether we do see big rises in mental health issues for young people, which is sort of predicted, but at the moment, we just don't know the size of that problem. So, excuse me, whilst I think we've had a positive year, or as positive as it could be, I think there are real, we are certainly not resting on our laurels moving forward. The overall picture is that during COVID, our most vulnerable children were visited, they were looked after, they were given the support they need, and I don't think you could have expected any more from our professionals than I've seen them giving. And I also think that, you know, it's been particularly difficult here, and I'd like to say a big thank you to Jeanette. I think the work she has put in over this year has been phenomenal, obviously together with Diane, but Jeanette's driven so much of this work forward, and in very, very difficult circumstances. So I commend the report to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Any questions, committee members? Just something I picked up that I don't think you've touched on, Stephen, in your summary. In the report, there are 2 pages which just trying to find the heading of it, the facts and figures pages. And in the second one, I've noticed that the inpatient admission rate, so it's on page 52 of the pack or page 16 of the report. Yeah, about halfway down. So the rate of hospital admissions for mental health conditions, Blackpool is quite starkly higher than the other areas in Lancashire, and also against the national average. And I just wondered if there was any particular context around that you might be able to share.
No, I can't really. There has always been a higher than average figure, I think I'm right in saying. What we have done, and we're still awaiting the result of this, is we've asked the CCG to prepare for us a response document in terms of mental health, and the what is in place will be in place moving forward. So I can certainly find out more information, Councillor Hugo, and I will get that to you.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, any more questions, committee members? Okay, I don't know whether Councillor Williams or Jeanette might like to add to anything mentioned around the domestic abuse or the neglect that Stephen touched on.
Chair, just to Councillor Farrell chairs the Domestic Abuse Board. I think it's met twice now, and is on with some quite detailed plans and some good work with that. I'm sure that will tie in sort of, with this board and also, with Steve. And I also want to say thank you to Steve for his work this year. And his report, and support, not for me, but for the officers, has been very much appreciated. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Jeanette, did you want to add anything about the neglect area?
So it remains a continued area of worry for us. It's a priority for the CSAP partnership. And therefore we've got key strategic partners coming together to review a fairly robust action plan, thinking about our areas of focus. And out of that work has resulted some addition of new screening tools around neglect to support an earlier identification of neglect across the partnership for both older children and in relation to unborns, thinking about our commitment to try and reduce newborn entry into care. So there's quite a lot of work that is ongoing. But thinking about this issue around developing staff within children's services, our PSW Cora is heavily involved in work that happens every month in reviewing children's records where neglect has been identified as a feature, and she gets alongside the social worker and the responsible team manager and others to have some sort of reflective conversations and action learning sessions. So rather than just formal QA activity and audit activity, this is having those conversations about what do we need to do differently to improve the lived experience of these children. So lots of work around that, but yet so much more to do, of course. In relation to domestic abuse is a real driver for high volumes of requests for support that come into children's services. And there are, it's again, the CSAP priority has got the same arrangements in place, a subgroup with an action plan. We are also involved in thinking about what an alternative model might look like in response to high-risk domestic abuse, so the multi-agency risk assessment conferences that are currently running, and we want to think about what would a multi-agency co-located offer look like that would respond to those notifications that are received by the police in real time. So that's another area of practice development. And in relation to children's services staff, there's been quite a lot of training around the use of risk assessments around domestic abuse and the need to establish safety plans for children, young people and the victims. So there's a lot of work that is ongoing, and maybe we'll bring some of that back to a further scrutiny committee.
Yes, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Okay, and sorry, Councillor Critchley.
Thanks, Jane. Sorry, just two questions, and it was just where Jeanette left off then on domestic abuse. Jeanette, what's Operation Compass? What is it? And then the domestic abuse aware-raising campaign. Where will this campaign be, and how will we sort of get it out there? I don't know really, because I haven't seen anything, so I just wondered what the campaign was about. Thanks, Jeanette.
Okay, so Operation Encompasses has been running across Pan Lancashire for maybe about 3 years now, and this is a really good example of partnership working, whereby colleagues in education and those in schools agreed to work with the police and accept details and information in relation to domestic abuse incidents that had occurred in households where those children were living. So very timely information sharing from the police straight into schools, so that schools can be cited on the lived experience of those children and think about a trauma-informed approach to responding maybe to there may be an escalation of behaviour from that child or young person, but a more intuitive response and basically understanding the lived experience of those children. I mean, Blackpool has been really proactive in trialling different approaches to domestic abuse. So colleagues in the police with colleagues in health and the commissioned IDVAs have been running a pilot called Operation Provide. And that is at the point where a victim contacts the police to raise concerns around domestic abuse, that IDVAs and the police go out jointly and respond immediately, but not just in terms of that criminal justice response, but that more holistic response from the IDVA, thinking about safety planning at that immediate point in time, there's been lots of learning, and we'll take that learning into the consideration of what the new MARAC model might look like. And sorry, there was a third part of the question, I think, was there? Have I missed something there?
Yeah,
Councillor
you've
Critchley?
done no, that's fine, Jeanette. Sorry, I did. That's grand. But just my worry, I suppose, is do we as a council do enough then to lobby the government to bring in, since Sarah, that young lady, got murdered, there's to my knowledge today, 8 women died since then. And I don't feel as if the government are doing enough to protect our women. So are we as a council doing enough to lobby our government to protect women?
There's two component parts of this issue. There's the protection of women within families and households within their homes, and then there's a wider protection of women within the community. And I mean, there could never be enough awareness raising publicity campaigns around domestic abuse. One of the other ways of addressing the issue of domestic abuse is really important education around appropriate relationships. So that is a feature of school curriculums now, isn't it, for our children and young people? Understanding what a healthy relationship looks like is a work stream. And then in relation to abuse of women within the community, the council is beginning to think about what we could do to improve the safety across the community. But actually, we've been really strong in this message that it must stop. The harassment, stalking, victimisation of women within the community must stop, and we won't tolerate it. So we are on with trying to think about how we could corral all our assets across the community to improve community safety for women.
Okay, thank you very much. So no further questions on this agenda item?
Chair, could I just, following on from Jeanette, I thought I'd raised my hand, but I obviously hadn't. But it was just following on from what Jeanette has said. I mean, when the following the absolute horrendous, tragic, awful event, concerning the loss of life, Sarah, it was, we released a statement. I released a statement. It stops here, and that is a campaign that is continuing. We are working and looking at different ways that we can implement this, that will support and widen across the town. The really good work that is ongoing. That Jeanette has talked about. So it is very much. It stops. It does stop here. It will stop, and we will do absolutely everything that we can, including locally, as well as calling on government to introduce measures. But that's obviously a debate for I think for a different scrutiny. Really, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. And I'd just like to thank Stephen Ashley for the really thorough report and for the interesting discussion that's generated. So yeah, thank you for your efforts and for all the hard work from everybody that's put into that. Thank you. I do believe I've been remiss and I bypassed agenda item 6.
Yeah,
so
you did.
So if we could return to agenda item 6, apologies for that. I believe it's pages 27 to 34 if you need to look back in your papers. And this is around Children's Social Care Improvement Plan, Child Exploitation and Homelessness. So, Jeanette, would you like to introduce this item?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So I'll just open it up for comments and questions, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes, you refer to a pilot that's commencing in April, and I just wondered if the committee might be able to get the results of the pilot.
Absolutely, yes. So thank you, Chair. So this builds on the strong partnership that's developed in the last sort of 12, 18 months within the Awaken team, but also reaching out to colleagues in community safety. We've seen increased use of civil orders to disrupt the exploitation of children, and we are going to regularly go out there in the community with children's services staff from Awaken, police and community safety to disrupt that activity. And that is linked to the model that we've developed for thinking about the context and the contextual safeguarding aspect of exploitation. We can work really, really well in engaging with young people, but if we don't do anything about the context and disrupt that activity, then the model will not be successful. So we'll certainly bring something back for you. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any more questions from committee members on this item? Councillor Mitchell?
Thank you, Chair. I'm struck by the reference to homelessness in this report, and there's some reference to compulsory homelessness and I think voluntary homelessness. I actually know how these are defined in law, but not everybody does. And I think the most important thing is how they are defined in practice. So, for example, somebody who had been evicted for not paying rent would generally be regarded as voluntarily homeless. But then, of course, they've got children who do nothing wrong in any way, and we don't want them to be homeless. Could you have an explanation in broad terms, please, at how these definitions are in practice?
So, in terms of, so there's two distinct groups. There's families, and then there's the homelessness of our young people. In relation to the circumstances that you've described, I think Blackpool can be congratulated for working tirelessly to prevent families becoming homeless, and that support services would work in partnership with housing to provide that support to prevent that from happening. And I think I'm not aware of a family being made homeless in recent times because of that commitment, understanding the impact upon children. And whichever legislation we consider, we absolutely know that the primacy is the Children Act and the council's duty to support children. So even if we had the most, chaotic of families that were struggling to hold down tenancies, if we felt, and in most circumstances we would, that those parents should continue to care for the children, then children's services would support with those arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
Mitchell, I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, I was expecting an answer, something of that type. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Clapham?
Thank you. Just to carry on with the intentionally homeless, would this also include families that vacate a home in a town inland, for instance, and then just appear on our door in Blackpool because they like to live here?
So, Councillor Clapham, I'm not an expert in housing legislation, but I'm fairly confident that the duty to that family would lie with the authority that they have left and not with Blackpool, and that our housing department, when that family presents, have developed a robust approach to gathering information and understanding the circumstances of both families and young people, and they would liaise with the responsible authority. The duty would lie with the previous authority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee members. Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Clapham?
Yes, it's me again. One of the areas that's always been a problem is vulnerable young people when they turn 18, become an adult. I'd like to know more on the support that we give these people when they actually go out into society. What do we do for them that would have been done for a normal family between the ages of 18 and 25? They seem to sometimes disappear into the ether. So what support are we giving them? Because they certainly need it.
Absolutely, Councillor Clapham, you make a good point. And in terms of our children that are looked after, we have our duties to those young people who are care experienced clearly imposed upon us via legislation, and our care leavers team would support those young people. And integral to those young people becoming successful adults is that early transition planning and being really forward, getting that right and getting that right in a timely way. In relation to those children and young people that are not looked after, that have experienced trauma through their adolescence and are receiving services from children's services, only a small proportion of those children would be eligible for formal adult services. But we are really lucky in Blackpool in terms of our young people services that can stretch out and reach out to those young people and support them in their transition through to independence. And there's an additional floating support from our colleagues in housing to support those young people maintain tenancies if it's a housing issue, and if it's a wider health or holistic issue, then our young people services would support those young people as well. I think we are good at pushing out the messages around how to access services. And in recent times, we've seen the reopening of our family hubs, that idea that we absolutely want to ensure that we've got that community-based services with doors open for people to feel that they can step in and access support.
Chairman, could I follow that up, please? Could we have a further report on it to show us the figures, the facts of the support that's given and the numbers of vulnerable people that are involved? Because I have no idea, having read the literature, 100 and odd pages of this report for tonight's agenda, and I think it would help us fully understand where we stand. Is that all right, Jeanette?
Thank you, Councillor Clapham.
Thank you, Councillor Clapham. Dr. Allen?
Thank you, Chair. And can I just ask, in terms of child exploitation, how much work are we doing working with local, the community business partners? I'm going to make a particular reference here to taxi firms. In terms of the part they play in ensuring that children aren't exploited. And I had a very sad, without disclosing any confidence, conversation with a ex-parent of mine who is going through turmoil with a child who is known to you and is being exploited, as you know, at the moment, obviously involved in county lines, etc. And yet this child is being collected by taxi firms in the middle of the night. And, you know, I actually said to this parent, well, surely, you know, are these legitimate businesses? Of course, there's our private taxis, aren't there? But these are children being picked up by our own taxis. And when this was followed up with the parent as to which taxi firm, they said I think it was the Awaken team, but basically said we'll deal with that. But I was just actually surprised that, you know, we haven't even got that sort of thing under control, you know, that children are collected and then photographing and putting these things on WhatsApp, and these are children that must be using this in some kind of communication. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Allen. It's an important point to raise. So firstly, the sharing of that sort of intelligence is critical to disrupting that activity and safeguarding our children and young people. And when that information is shared with us, then it will be considered in a multi-agency setting within the Awaken team, and that happens every day through the daily exploitation meetings. So all those pieces of intelligence that come in are considered. And in relation to taxi services, there are fairly robust arrangements in place around the licensing of taxi services. And in order to secure a licence in Blackpool, all taxi drivers have to have safeguarding training. And where there's been some concerns identified in relation to criminal exploitation, our partners in community safety, who have responsibility for licensing, also have engaged with taxi services and have opened some lines of communication. And last week we had some examples of taxi drivers sharing such intelligence and raising concerns around young people moving across addresses very late at night in the early hours of the morning. So it is something that we are aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Stansfield. Thank you.
I don't know if Councillor Stansfield was going to say the same thing, but unfortunately, not every licence is granted by Blackpool Council. There's one local taxi firm that sends its drivers to contact Wolverhampton Authority and get the licence from Wolverhampton, and then they operate under private hire conditions. And my understanding is they don't do any child sexual exploitation course. It's not as good as it could be. Whether that explains the problem in the particular instance that's just been reported to us, I don't know. But it is a weakness, and obviously it would be much better if everybody had a licence and passed this course.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell, and I'll take that information back to our colleagues in community safety. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor Stansfield, you were nodding there.
It was exactly the same thing, and it was probably not something for this scrutiny, but it was mentioned the other day at a different meeting that people do exploit the loopholes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, is your hand up, or is that from before?
No, it is. I don't think it was up before, but it is intentionally up now.
Thank you.
Not good wording, that really. But the it was just following on Councillor Mitchell's point. We've had meetings. We are aware of the concern. Child sexual exploitation training is actually mandatory, I believe, across the country. But what we are particularly concerned about is the additional training and requirements and enforcement of that in Blackpool, and the reporting restrictions, because obviously, without labouring the point and taking it out with the jurisdiction of this scrutiny committee, if you are licensed to a different area, then any issues, any concerns, any reports about would not be dealt with by this authority and would be dealt with by the licensing authority. So would be outside the control of Blackpool, but that is something that is very active. As I said, we had a meeting on it yesterday around it to look to those concerns, because for me the major concern is in relation to this aspect of it, is in relation to the monitoring and ensuring and adhering to the training, around safeguarding and child sexual exploitation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. So it's good to know that although a loophole has been found, we're all aware of it within the council, and it's getting tackled in the best way that we can. Thank you for that. Any more questions on this agenda item? No, thank you. Thank you very much for your report. We shall move on now to agenda item 8, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disability Local Provision. And we have Philip Thompson with us to introduce this report, please.
Good evening, everybody. So the purpose of the report was to give council members an overview of our development of local provision within schools. So I'll take any questions or comments on the report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So have we got questions, members? Yes, Councillor Wing.
Yes, it was concerning the SEND operations within secondary schools, which seems to be going on for ages, but none have been open yet. Primary seems to be going okay, but nothing in secondary.
Yes, and the councillor makes a good point. The issue we have in Blackpool is all of our secondary schools are academies. So a lot of the work that we do with them is by negotiation and partnership. So we are working with them to try and open SEN provision within them, but we can't force them to do it. It's very much based on negotiation. So it is a tricky area for us, but we are hoping to see some movement on that very, very shortly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? Councillor Clapham?
Yeah, this is another nutmeg that we've been dealing with for a while, and that's the use of the Oracle building. Is there any movement on that, Philip? Anything new you can tell us about whether we're going to be moving in there?
Yeah, well, at the moment, Paul and I met last week and we've had to hit pause on the Oracle proposal. We've been working with an academy trust to see if we could set up a post-16 specialist SEN centre there. The problem is, and I think Paul will agree, we're not on the same page. So the council SEN service has a view of what we think the local young people will need in terms of a post-16 SEN provision, but we're concerned that the trust that have expressed an interest in running that provision have got a different agenda. So we've had lots of meetings with them, and at the moment we've hit pause on that. So we are coming up with a different plan for the Oracle building around SEN to see if we could use it to create some short-term additional capacity within our special school estate, whilst we work with the schools to try and reduce the numbers of children within our special schools, because we, as council members know, we are a statistical outlier in the number of children we've got within our special schools compared to regional and national average, and it is one of our strategic priorities to try and reduce the numbers of children within our special schools and see them access a more mainstream education.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you. Any further questions here? Would it be possible, Philip, for us to have some more information about this pause and the plans going forward? Perhaps some kind of detail about where you see the building being useful in meeting other gaps now. Now you've been given, it sounds like we've had a bit of a curveball with this particular plan, because we were progressing quite well, I believe, from last time you reported to us on this. So it's disappointing to hear that it has had to pause, but also it's good to know that you are aware that the agendas were different and we're not going ahead regardless. But yeah, it would be interesting to find out what gaps you've got in mind that this building could meet in the future.
Yes, that's fine. And Paul and I had a meeting today to discuss it. So, you know, we are going to look to move forward with some proposals, and I'll report back on that at the next scrutiny meeting.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Thank you. So we're on to agenda item 9, which is the literacy strategy. And over to Paul Turner to introduce this, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just before I move on with the literacy strategy, it's just picking up that final point from Phil about the progression with SEN. So there will be a new SEN strategy available by July of this year, and obviously there'll be significant consultation which takes place between now and then on that. So members of Scrutiny will see full details of the entire SEND overview for Blackpool, the direction of travel, the proposals for action, and obviously something which will have longevity relating to the Oracle, if not in use of that building, but in the nature of the provision that is placed in that building moving forward. So members of Scrutiny have our assurances that will be done robustly with a lot of detail, and you'll be consulted upon that very early on in the process. So in terms of the literacy strategy, Scrutiny members have got a copy of the literacy strategy. This has been going through process for a long time now. I hope that members of the committee feel that they've been consulted adequately on the literacy strategy, and that this version of the literacy strategy is one which council members asked to include changes highlighted in yellow. So the nature of this document is that hopefully this is the final consultation document so that it can go to executive. But equally, we welcome final comments and suggestions around this strategy as well. So if we can go to questions on that, please, that'd be great.
So I think we've temporarily lost Chair. She's just trying to rejoin the meeting. If you bear with us just a moment.
No problem.
Councillor Stansfield, could I ask you maybe just to take over as chair while we're waiting for Councillor Hugo just to rejoin?
You can. I'm only working on an iPad, so I can't see everybody. So I might need some assistance. I might need some assistance if someone puts hand to speak and I don't see them.
I'm back. Okay, so yeah, are you okay if I carry on then, Councillor Stansfield?
Absolutely fine there, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I just ended up outside of the meeting. But yes, okay. So, yes, we've all been able to have sight of the draft literacy strategy and have made comments. We've met with Paul Turner, sorry. There we are again, getting those two people mixed up. Yes, I think that in the main, we are happy that the amendments and additions have been addressed. Is everybody okay with that, members? Yeah. There was a comment from Helen, who was in our pre-meeting, but she's not been able to join us in this meeting tonight. And it was just around a target on page 93. But it might be easier if I could just send you an email, Paul, and copy Helen in so she can explain that better rather than me try and relay what the point was that she was making, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Thank you.
Okay. And I think other than that, yep, we're very happy that you've taken on board our comments. So thank you for all your hard work and efforts there. Okay, so I think now we can move on to the work plan, which is agenda item 10. Just get it up on my screen. It just takes a bit longer on the laptop than on the iPad. There we go. Okay, so we've got a number of appendices that are attached to this agenda item. So the first one, Appendix 10A, are there any comments or questions on this item? No, everybody happy with the work plan? Excellent. So agenda item Appendix 10B. Everybody okay with this? Any questions? No, good. Okay, we'll move on to Appendix 10C, which is the school response to the COVID pandemic action plan. Are there any questions or comments that anybody would like to make on this? Nope. Okay. Moving on to Appendix 10D, which is the Inclusion in Education Scrutiny Review Action Plan. And Paul Turner is, I think you provided us with updates in that final column there, Paul. Are there any questions or comments in relation to this? Okay, I had a couple. Just find my right notes. So, yes, 10D. So, recommendation 1, item C. Is it that one? Sorry, no. Recommendation 2. Oh, yes. So this is about people that have elected home education during COVID and are being encouraged to return to school. As we've heard throughout this meeting, really, that's something that we feel is really important. We want more children in school and to absolutely reduce the amount of people being educated at home. So I just wondered if you were able to provide us with numbers there, Paul. And I know there's work going on to do that, but are we making progress? How many children have we been able to get returned to school?
Yeah, so Councillor Hugo, the number at the moment is approximately 350 children who are elected and home educated. So you remember the figures were in the 360s last time we saw the data. So there's been a small decrease in the numbers of children who are being home educated. And we have to remember, don't we, that lots of children are very appropriately educated at home. It's the children who we feel are inappropriately educated at home. And by that we mean that they are not receiving the high quality of education that we would expect within the home setting, which is actually in Blackpool, the work that the officers do is very thorough, and they do see a lot of families and a lot of children and make contact with all the families and children. So we have very good safeguarding processes around that. So we are making progress. Schools collectively have stated that they will welcome children back, as you would expect, onto roles of their schools. So the children have been sent a letter and they have basically been given some options. So first option was to return immediately, and families were naturally cautious about doing this because of the nature of the roadmap back to normality. The other option was to return after May half term, or then to return in September. So we're awaiting replies from the parents of those children about what option they wish to take. If the school has places, then it's a straight return to that school. If the school is full, around infant class size regulations and so on and so forth, or has had a waiting list as admitted over their published admissions number for that year, then they will go either to appeal or through in-year fair access to re-access their place or access a place in another school. So progress is very good. Nationally, the numbers of EHE haven't declined very much at all. Blackpool's numbers obviously have declined slightly. We have retained the services of an additional elective home education officer as well till at least September. And the 0.6 full-time equivalent elective home education officer who was in post permanently is continuing at the full-time equivalent. So she's a full-time elective home education officer until at least September as well. But the funding should allow us to take us through until the end of next school year as well to do that. So we're going to come back to scrutiny and report on that. But we're very happy at the moment in the way it's progressing, in that, as I said, the children are safe, they're contacted regularly, and the children where we have concerns about their provision, then we have robust staff.
Just lost Paul's frozen there. Just while we wait for Paul to
defrost.
To defrost, to come back to the meeting. I would just like to say yes, thank you. He pointed out that some children are very well educated at home, and I think the way I explained it might have been a bit misleading. So I do absolutely acknowledge that we are educating. Some children are home educated perfectly, adequately. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Okay, we still haven't got him back. And we're close to the end of the agenda, so I can't even leap to a different item, really. Okay. I only had one more question, and it was on the recommendation 7 around the academies having input from elected councillors. And I was wondering if we might be able to get a breakdown of the progress. Paul's told us that it's ongoing progress, but it would be interesting to see where councillors are having an input into the academies. So I can follow that up in an email with him. Yeah, okay. So if everybody's in agreement, we'll move on. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so it's just the final agenda item, which is to confirm the date of the next meeting, which is the 24th of June at 6 p.m, if that's agreeable with everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you all for your time and all the hard work and effort that goes into our children and young people in the town. We really do value all your work. So thank you once again. Good night.
Thanks, Jane. Night, night.